altered states of consciousness have this potential to create a insight of consciousness. Now, they also have the potential to do the opposite, right? They have the potential to screw up your salience landscaping and make yourself more prone to bullshit, more prone to self-deception. That's why most altered states of consciousness are rejected as being illusory and delusory. But why is it then that certain altered states of consciousness have the opposite? Why is it that certain altered states of consciousness feel like this? Like, wait, it all makes sense now. I'm seeing through illusion into reality in a way I haven't before. Why is that altered state more real, the really real, as Plato is fond of saying? And this everyday, is less real. Why do I feel like I woke up, that I became, right, an adult to my previous form that seemed to me like a child? What's going on? So let's set up the problem, because getting clear about the problem is half the battle. Formulating a problem well is much of the important work at trying to bring a solution to it. So we know that many people experience, as I've mentioned, these higher states of consciousness. And what reliably, we'll talk about the phenomenological profile in a bit, but reliably, what is characteristic of these states is that people find them to be really real and in both directions, arena and agent. They say, wow, that's the way the world really is, and they also say, this is who I really am. So much so that I'm going to transform my everyday experience so that it comes more consonant with that realness, that enhanced realness. So there's a mutual moreness, a mutual more realness that happens in these higher states of consciousness. And it's prescriptive. It demands change. It challenges people to change. It taps into those Platonic meta drives of getting your fullness of being, your real self, and getting the fullness of contact reality. It twitches those on, and you go, I need to have that. I'm willing to transform everything in order to get back to that really real world and that really real self. So I call this, so we have the higher states of consciousness. I call this the problem of the ontonormativity. Remember that ontology has to do with the structure of reality. Normative is when things are placing a demand on you to be better, to improve. So these higher states of consciousness are precisely experienced as higher because they're challenging you to change, because they're presenting you more realness. And they're triggering those Platonic meta drives. Now, as I mentioned, these states are historically important and they're pervasive. So you can read Taylor's book, Waking from Sleep. He has about 150 interviews. You can read many of he presents a lot of first-person narratives of these people in this experience. You can take a look at Newberg's book, How Enlightenment Changes Your Brain. He did an online survey of 1,500 people in 2016. As I mentioned, there's just larger general surveys of how often people have these kinds of experiences, and they range in intensity, but it's around 30 to 40% of the population. So we have to take these experiences seriously. We know that from the work at the Griffiths Lab that what's happening in a subset of psychedelic experiences, so here's all the psychedelic experiences, you have a subset in which people have a mystical experience, and some of those people, the mystical experience is deeply transformative. It triggers that kind of quantum change. Okay, so why is the ontonormativity of higher states of consciousness problematic? Well, here's why. The transformative experience that people undergo, the radical transformations they're willing to make, seems to be driven and justified by this. Why are you doing this? I'm doing this because I had this experience and it was more real and I've got to stay in touch with more real. They justify this transformation. I mean, sorry, I don't mean to be reductive, and I'm not being disrespectful, but, you know, Buddhism and Taoism and Vedanta and the core of, you know, aspects of Judaism and the mystical traditions in Christianity and Islam come down to this claim: I had this, and it justifies what I'm telling you. It explains and motivates the changes that I underwent. But why is that problematic? Look, because it's, like I said, it's in contrast to how we treat most of our altered states of consciousness. We go into dreaming, we come back and we say that's not real. We go into these, we come back and say that was more real, and this is less real.